Hey, so I finally got the show notes for the last episode up.
The man is Heinrich Kramer, and he is writing the most blood-soaked book of the 15th century, the Malleus Maleficarum, the Witch's Hammer, a book that would torment the world for a century after its release and be responsible for the torture and death of 70,000 innocent people.
Treating of three necessary concomitants of witchcraft, which are the devil, a witch, and the permission of Almighty God.
He goes on to say that female empowerment would bring on the apocalypse. He even made the title of the book Female, to hammer home his point. Malleus Maleficarum is a hammer used only on women.
So, you must find the mark. We must find the mark.
Greetings, fellow worker slaves podcasting at 128 kilobits from the Fortress of Squalitude located not far from the Redneck Mecca. This is the Atheist in the Trailer Park podcast. I'm your host, Tucker. Professor Fuzznuts and Lord Nibbler are in my room. Yes, it's a podcast hosted by a guy and his cats. Get over it. And this is a Hex and Hammer episode where Skullbeard and I read a section from the medieval witch hunting manual. And, there's nothing really fantabulous about this episode. So, it's not horrible, but there's nothing like outrageously funny in it. But it does shed some light on some things dealing with stupid beliefs. So, brief update about what's been going on around here. I did manage to get a little bit of overtime in this past week. 4 hours. Wednesday night, they came up to me and asked me if I wanted to stay over and work overtime. And I said, sure. Which was tiring, mostly because I'm not used to working 12-hour shifts. They put us on a machine that had not been ran during our shift or on day shift. At least I don't think it had been run on day shift. I know it had not been ran on our shift. And so it took an hour roughly for us to get all the supplies needed so that we could run the machine. It was not all set up and ready to go when we got there. We needed to get these little, needed pallets, needed labels, needed boxes, needed tape guns, had to get all that. Then they turned the machine on, and for the next, couple hours, it would run for a little bit, and then either the machine would break down, or it would start spitting out bad parts. So, once they turned the machine on, it took them at least 30 minutes to get it warmed up and running properly, which sometimes happens when a machine has sat for a while. So, and, then once it's up and running, it breaks down constantly. And, we maybe did an hour's worth of productive work, as in making product that could be shipped out. And a half an hour before it was time for us to go, they shut the machine off. So, we spent part of that time cleaning the area up and stuff like that. And then we just kind of twiddled our thumbs until we could leave. Now, Thursday, when I came at work, they were like, hey, you want to stay over? And I would have done it. But they had put me on a job that was kind of physically demanding that night. Whereas on Wednesday night, I had a really cakewalk of a job. But the job I had on Thursday was a little physically demanding, and I hadn't gotten a lot of sleep that day because when I got off work that morning, I'm like, I'm just going to go home, straight on home and go to bed. I get home and, I mean, I'm really fuzzy and tired and out of it when I get home because I had forgotten that I had done some things during the day, and it was like, when I got home, I was like, did I do that today, or was that the day before, or what? And when I had left, I said to myself, I have to stop off at the store and get cat food because I'm really low. But I didn't do that because I was tired, and I went straight home, and I got to the house, and, there was enough, Nibbler and Fuzznuts had food in their bowl. No problem there. And I had enough that I could give a scoop of cat food to the ferals outside, but there was no way I was going to have food for them when I got up in the morning. So I was like, okay, I will go to the store, get cat food. I can go to one of the stores really close to the house, get cat food. And when I, get up early, get the cat food, come home, feed the cat, and go back to bed for a little bit. Well, Nibbler had other ideas. I got up, I went to bed, and, my plan was, well, I'll get up, a little earlier than usual, and, I'll have time to get the cat food and take a quick nap before I go, but I'll get most of my sleep in the morning. No, that's not what happened. Because I got to bed somewhere after 4 in the morning. Around 9 o'clock in the morning, Nibbler decides, Daddy's a trampoline. Hi, Daddy. Jumpy, jumpy, jumpy. So I was, after, I don't know, half an hour or so of this and not being able to get back to sleep, I'm like, let me get up, go get the cat food, and feed the outside cats so they're not starving. And if I happen to wake up a little late, I'm not, I'm not forced to go to work without getting the cats food and feeding them. So I go, get the cat food, come home, feed the cats, and crawl back into bed. I get a little sleep, and then, Fuzznuts and Nibbler decide Daddy needs to wake up and play with us. Daddy needs to wake up and play with us. We know he doesn't normally get out of bed this time of day, but he needs to wake up and play with us. So I had a rather fitful sleep until it was time to get up and go to work, which meant that when they offered me overtime Thursday night, I just could not do it. And since the plant shut down on Saturday and doesn't restart until Sunday evening, late Sunday night, we didn't have a chance to get any overtime last night, but still I got some. And one last bit before we get to Skullbeard and I, work is getting ready to fuck all of us, it seems, with AI. Now, they haven't officially said that this is what they're doing, but it's what they're doing. How do I know this? Well, so, I'll call the guy the assistant plant manager. That may not be what his title is, but it's close enough. Was talking on Friday, casually talking with us, so this wasn't like an official announcement or anything, but one is coming. He said that in May, they are going to be installing new time clocks. Right now, we only have like two. One for the full-time employees and one for the temporary employees. And we're supposed to get a whole bunch more for the full-time employees. Their reason for this is they want us to clock in to the minute. Okay, for those of you who have never worked an hourly job in your life, and I'm not denigrating people who haven't done that, it's just that I have been stunned in my life and hearing discussions from people who have no idea how it works when you work hourly. You have your assigned start and stop times for your shift, and you can clock in on average 7 minutes early. Nobody cares. If you clock in 8 or more minutes early, they might get upset because they pay in 15-minute increments, and if you clock in more than 8 minutes early, they start paying you. Yes, I know that's not 15, but that's halfway between 15 and your start time. So, and a lot of people I've worked with have done this when, finances are tight. They'll clock in 8 minutes early and clock in 8 minutes late, or clock out 8 minutes late. That way they get an extra half hour of pay, which that half hour is overtime. Well, with the new system they want to go to, you're not allowed to clock in 1 minute before your start time. So they're getting all these extra clocks because they think that will enable people to clock in, on time without having to clock in a little bit early. That's not going to work because of the number of employees we have on a shift and the fact that it takes time for the time clock to register that you've clocked in. And I don't care what kind of time clock you have. There's going to be issues. Like right now we have these electronic time clocks that scan our finger and allow us to clock in, which I'm assuming they're going to do something like that because you don't want somebody to be able to punch in a number to clock in or out, or to punch in a badge, or to swipe their badge on the time clock. Because here's what people can do, and it happens. So you'll have, say, two people who ride to work together, and they're running late, and to get to work, the person, who's driving the car isn't going to have time to park the car and get into the building and clock in without being late. So what they would do is they would hand their badge or tell the person their ID number that they're riding, who's riding with them. They would drop that person off by the front door. That person would go in and clock themselves in and then clock their friend in. That is a violation of federal law, I point out, while the other person parks their car. But so if you've got a fingerprint scanner, then you can't do that. So it's almost certainly going to be a fingerprint scanner that is used to clock in. There's other ways that it could be, but I'm not getting into that. Right, well, those things, you scan, it can take 10 seconds or more for that thing to clock you in, even if everything goes right. In other words, because what'll happen if you don't have your finger sitting exactly right on the scanner, it won't recognize you and it'll give you an error message and you have to redo everything. And if we all have to clock in at 3 o'clock, not 2:59, not any time before that, because you can't be a minute late. If you're a minute late, then that counts against your attendance. Unless your supervisor goes in and adjusts things for you and takes away the flag that says this person is late. or HR could do that. So, you're not going to be allowed to clock in early, and I'm assuming you're not going to be allowed to clock out late. And we all have to clock in and out for lunch, which raises an issue because oftentimes, well, 99% of the time, I should say, we don't have a set time when we go to lunch because they break us out individually. And depending upon which machine you're working on and what machines your line lead is over, depends on when you get sent to your lunch. Naturally, they try to send you at the hour or the half hour mark, but it doesn't always work that way. And you know, if you're working with this one line lead on a particular machine, you may get sent to break at the hour mark, but when you're working with maybe that same lead or a different lead on a different machine, you may get sent to your lunch at the half hour mark, or some fraction thereof. It may be instead of going at 6:30, you're going at 6:35 or 6:45 or whatever. It's never consistent. If you're dealing to the minute, sometimes you can have a string of luck where it is consistent. Yes, you always go to break at around 6 o'clock or around 6:30, but it's never consistent that you're going to be go to break at exactly 6 o'clock or 6:30. Which means you go to clock out, you have to pay really close attention to what time you clocked out for lunch if we have to clock to the minute. Now, if we don't have to clock to the minute, then, you get done with your lunch and everything and you're like, I clocked out at 6:30, it's 6:58. Screw it, I'm going to clock in now. It doesn't matter. I'm not getting paid for those 2 minutes anyways. And you're doing that just because you don't know if even if all you're doing is because the clock is mounted on the wall just outside of the break room, and you get up to do whatever, and it's 2 minutes before you got to clock it back in. What the fuck you gonna do? Stand in front of the time clock for 2 minutes? Or go to the bathroom and hope that you get back to the clock in 2 minutes and not 2 minutes and 1 second? No, fuck it. You're gonna clock back in those 2 minutes early, because again, you're not getting paid for them. And then maybe you'll head straight back to your machine. Maybe you'll take a leak, or but you're not abusing how long you're on lunch. It's just, okay, I finished my lunch, I've got up, and I'm not waiting around 2 minutes or whatever. I should also point out that we have to, if we go outside the building, we have to, when we come back in, go through a metal detector. I think I've mentioned this before on the show, but we have, every time we come in from the outside through the front door, we have to go through a metal detector. We have to empty our pockets, and if the metal detector goes off, then we have to go back through the metal detector, and it's a whole bunch of bullshit. Not only because if somebody were inclined to come in and shoot up the place, the first person they'd shoot is a security guard sitting at the metal detector, and because of the noise in the facility, most people would not hear that gunshot. And the other thing I will point out is the metal detector. And I don't know if it is comparable to airport units because I have not been on a plane since 2007. You can walk through one time with, your keys out of your pocket, your phone out of your pocket, but your earbuds, your headphones in your pocket, it won't set off the alarm. The next time you walk through that metal detector, you don't have your keys or your phone in your pocket. You still got your your earbuds in your pocket. That'll set off the metal detector, and then you have to go back through. You never know what the fuck is going to happen when you go through that metal detector, whether it'll go crazy or not. And the security guards, once they've been there for a while, are like, yeah, man, whatever. Unless the head of security is there, and then they will make you go back through. Sometimes they'll use their wand to check you out. They'll ask you to show if you're wearing a belt, like 99% of all men do. The numbers for women are lower, I know, but still, it is absolute security theater. And anybody with a lick of sense would know that, but they don't. So if you're somebody like me who is a smoker or who just wants to be outside on break because you're basically in a windowless building while you're at work and it's nice to breathe fresh air and see the sun, when you come back from break, you got to go through this, security. And if you misjudge things, well, then it takes you a little longer to get through security than it should, and you could be late. So now, oftentimes, what will happen is somebody's coming in from break, from lunch, and they'll just wave at the security guy who's not in a booth. They're sitting at a table right next to the metal detector, and they'll run over, put their finger on the time clock, and then go and do all the things so that the security guard knows they're not packing heat. Okay, so all those little oddballs. Well, you clocked in 2 minutes early, or they have to be corrected by somebody in HR. They have to sit there and say, okay, yeah, this is not important. But just because you clock in late doesn't mean that it's going to be held against you. Again, that depends on management, that depends on HR, and the reasons why you're late. Right, because there's been days when if you're coming from one direction to work, which a lot of people are, and there's an accident on the road, you can't get to work on time. And management has said, we're not counting it against them. They'll do it if the weather's bad, things like that. When I was still a temp, I had the situation where, I had looked and at something and it said, we expect temps in their 90 days to have perfect attendance. And so I went up to the supervisor we had at the time and I said, hey, I've got this really important package coming on this day, and I could, I need to be there to pick it up, so I may be a little late. Is that okay? And they were like, yeah, don't worry about it. You're a decent employee. And it was not held against me. And because if it had been, I wouldn't have been able to be hired on full time, since it was like my second or third week there as a temp, and they would have just kicked me out the door. So they're obviously, looking at cutting the HR staff for things like that. Now, how I know for certain they're going for AI stuff and trying to get rid of as many HR people as possible in our facility and all the others is that we are not going to be doing things that like in the way we used to when it comes to us calling out or requesting vacation time or things like that. It was, you need vacation time, fill out this form. Oh, you got to call out because you're sick. Here's the number you call. Nope, we're all going to have an app to do all of that with, and you have those things because you don't want to have as many HR people. I am an old dog. I have seen how companies do things over the years. And I can tell you that they are doing this because they think they can get rid of HR staffing. Because they'll let the AI and the machine take care of all of it. Even though that isn't practical for a lot of reasons. I need to point out that even though the company has 3 shifts, we only have HR on 1 shift. So if you need to talk to HR, you have to come, and you're not on first shift, you have to come in early or stay late. I have worked for companies that have had 3 shifts, and they have had HR personnel on all 3 shifts. Now, the HR wouldn't show up on overtime, if you're working a Saturday or whatever, but there would be, it didn't matter if you were first, second, or third. If it was your regularly scheduled shift, there would be somebody in HR there for you to talk to. And, yes, of course, HR works for the company, but HR, if they're good people, you go to them and you say, hey, look, I've got this issue with this thing or that thing. They'll say, all right, here's what you can do. Okay, you need medical treatment. Oh, okay. Here, don't worry about using your vacation time for these days. We'll cover you on FMLA, or the company has medical leave that they offer in addition to what you could get via FMLA. Stuff like that. And here's another thing that HR people can do. That happened at Stanley, and I didn't understand what was going on until somebody later on clued me in. Came into work one night, and there were all these HR people there, and at the start of the shift, they gave a little talk about how, they were going to be there the entire shift. And if anybody had any concerns or anything like that, feel free to talk to them. And they were going to be out on the floor. Very, very unusual. Again, I work second shift. HR will stay over till 4-ish, 4:30. So an hour and a half or at the most in our shifts, a lot of times, not always, but, there's a little bit of overlap with our shift, but not much. However, they were saying this time they were going to stay over the entire shift. One person was going to stay so many hours, and then this other person was going to come in and stay for the rest of the shift. Seemed a little odd, but had no idea, and I wasn't even going to hazard a guess as to what was going on. And then sometime later, I'm talking with this gal. She's in her early 20s. And yes, her age is relevant for reasons that will become apparent here in the very near future. She's talking to me, and again, this is days or weeks after that night. And we were talking about this coworker who had suddenly stopped coming to work. And this guy was early 60s, maybe late 50s, but probably early to mid 60s. And, you know, I had had some conversations with him. He seemed like the typical dude of that age. Not necessarily terribly sophisticated. Like, he asked me one time if I'd ever had Hunt Brothers Pizza because he thought it was really good. Hunt Brothers Pizza is gas station pizza. Literally. Hunt's Brothers they're not a pizza joint. They are a company that supplies the stuff for gas stations to sell pizza. You know, there are times when gas station pizza is exactly what you need, but nobody, and I mean nobody who has ever had a decent pizza in their life, and by decent, I'm setting the bar so low as to include Domino's and Pizza Hut, would consider it really good pizza. This guy, his name was Eddie, did. So, you know, kind of, he was a bit something. So the gal and I are talking, and she says, well, you remember Eddie? And I'm like, yeah. And she says, okay, you remember that night when HR said they were staying over all shift, and if anybody had any issues with anyone here or anything, let us know. She goes, I was responsible for that. I'm like, really? What happened? She explained things to me. She was friends on Facebook with this other gal who works there. That gal's about the same age. I don't know the specifics, but, if there's a difference in age, it's only a year or two. So, no. And the first gal, whom I'll call Susan, though that's not her real name. No, I'm kidding. I'm not going to give her a real name. Susan tells me that Eddie had sent her a friend request on Facebook. And that other gal, whom I'll call Becky, said to Susan, you do not want to be Facebook friends with this guy. He has said all these kinds of obnoxious things to me via Facebook. And I think at that time Becky was no longer there. And it had nothing to do with Eddie, why Becky wasn't there. From what I understand, it had to do with, something in Becky's background check raised a red flag with corporate, even though, I guess it was like she had gotten busted with a little bit of weed. It wasn't like she killed people or was a child molester. It was, it was a thing. So Becky, having told Susan that, Eddie's going to sexually harass you, Susan did the only sensible thing and blocked Eddie on Facebook. And that night, when she got to work, Eddie kind of cornered her not really cornered her. They just happened to be in a sort of a confined space at the same time. And she said Eddie gave her this really weird, evil-looking grin, and she's like, fuck this shit, I'm out of here, and went and told HR what had happened, and then just bailed. Perfectly understandable. Now, so obviously you gotta have a human being there to deal with that shit. And HR did not handle things the right way, in my opinion, because Eddie was not immediately fired. Because Eddie was guilty. Well, there were a number of credible sexual harassment accusations against Eddie, and it took a long time for the company to fire him for reasons I do not understand. Right? Because Eddie's a shitbag for hitting on women who are young enough to be, at the very least, his daughter, if not his granddaughter. And how are you going to report that to an AI and and get anything done? There has to be somebody there, a human being who is trained in things like the law, corporate policy, blah blah blah. There has to be a human being there, but because all these corporations are infatuated with AI, they don't grasp that. Because even companies that are progressive quite often don't understand how to handle certain things. And here's what I'm basing this off of. In the late 90s, early 2000s, I worked at the Gap distribution center here in town. The Gap clothing company, as is based out of San Francisco, and at least at the time, I don't know what they're like anymore, because it's been 20 fucking plus years since I've worked there. They were hugely progressive, especially for this area. If you showed up to work and you were covered in tattoos, they didn't fucking care. Which, at that point in time, in this area, if you had tattoos, you were kind of given the side eye. If you were gay, they didn't care. They were offering all kinds of benefits for gay couples at the Gap, which was unusual for this area. If you were trans, they offered you benefits, again, which was unusual for this area. For reasons that are far too complicated to go into here, when I was working there was a woman in my department who was being sexually harassed by one of her coworkers. And the Gap didn't know how to handle it. They would have meetings with her and the person who was sexually harassing her. And I don't know all the details, but I know enough to say that even if the solution had simply been to pull the dude aside and explain to him, she's not interested in you, so just, only talk to her about work-related matters. They didn't have the people there didn't have the understanding of that. And those people had been through really intensive training on how to do their jobs. If a company like the Gap can get that wrong, how is a company like Stanley, who has gotten rid of their DEI stuff, even though they were never really somebody I would consider progressive when it comes to DEI, going to be able to properly address the issues with an AI system? but because somebody at corporate thinks they can save a few bucks on their bottom line, that's what they're going to do. Okay, I'm done. I'm done because I got a lot of shit to do tonight, so let's just get to me and Skullbeard. And if you're lucky, you'll get another episode tonight. If not, it'll show up next weekend.
Remedies prescribed against hailstorms and for animals that are bewitched. With regard to the remedies for bewitched animals and charms against tempests, we must first note some unlawful remedies which are practiced by certain people. For these are done by means of superstitious words or actions, as when men cure the worms in the fingers or limbs by means of certain words or charms, the method of deciding the legality of which has been explained in the preceding chapters. There are others who do not sprinkle holy water over bewitched castle, but pour it into their mouths. Holy cow.
That's just...
There's some wicked
That's a
rocks in
thing.
there. Yeah, I'm sure it is.
Yeah. Beside the proofs, we have already given that the remedy of words is unlawful. William of Paris, whom we have often quoted, gives the following reason. If there were any virtue in words, as words, then it would be due to one of three things. Either their material, which is air, or their form, which is sound. Not really.
Well, if you got an oscilloscope going.
Or their meaning, or else to all three together. Now it cannot be due to air, which has no power to kill unless it be poisonous. Neither can it be due to sound, the power of which is broken by a more solid object. Is it live or is it Memorex?
Mm-hmm.
Neither can it be due to meaning, for in that case the words devil or death or hell would always be harmful, and the words health and goodness always be beneficial. Also, it cannot be due to all these three together, for when the parts of a whole are invalid, the whole itself is also invalid.
Obviously.
Mm-hmm.
And it cannot validly be objected that God gave virtue to words, just as he did to herbs and stones. For whatever virtue there is in certain sacramental words and benedictions and lawful incantations belongs to them, not as words, but by divine institution and ordinance according to God's promise. It is, as it were, a promise from God that whoever does such and such a thing will receive such and such a grace, and so the words of the sacraments are effective because of their meaning, although some hold that they have an intrinsic virtue. But these two opinions are not mutually inconsistent. But the case of other words and incantations is clear from what has already been said. I want to call bullshit, but I'm going to hold my tongue. For the mere composing or uttering of or writing of words as such can have no effect, but the invocation of the divine name and public prayer, which is a sacred protestation, committing the effect of the divine will, are beneficial. And that is some great word salad.
You think?
Mm-hmm.
We have treated above of remedies performed by actions which seem to be unlawful. The following is a common practice in parts of Swabia. I have never heard of Swabia.
Wow, you're American, so, I mean, you haven't heard of any place outside of America, have you?
Toronto.
That's in Ontario.
Kitchener.
All right.
Quebec. Paris. London. On the 1st of May, so that would be May Day, before sunrise, the women of the village go out and gather from the woods leaves and branches from willow trees and weave them into a wreath which they hang over the stable door. affirming that all the cattle who will then remain unhurt and safe from witchcraft for a whole year. And in the opinion of those who hold that vanity may be opposed by vanity, this remedy would not be unlawful, and neither would be the driving away of diseases by unknown cantrips and incantations. But without meaning an offense, we say that a woman or anyone else may go out on the first day or any other day of the month without considering the rising or the setting of the sun, and collect herbs or leaves and branches, saying the Lord's Prayer or the Creed, and hang them over the stable door in good faith, trusting to the will of God for their protective efficacy. Yet even so, the practice is not above reproach, as was shown in the preceding chapter in the words of St. Jerome, for even if he is not invoked, the devil has some part in the efficacy of herbs and stones. No.
Yeah. Okay, Swabia is a cultural, historic, and linguistic region in southwestern Germany. The name is ultimately derived from the medieval Duchy of Swabia, one of the German stem duchies, whatever the fuck those are, representing the historic settlement area of the Germanic tribe alliance named Alemanni and Suebi. So, I don't know, southwestern Germany. It's got some shit to do with the church.
Yeah.
It is the same with those who make the sign of the cross with leaves and consecrated flowers on Palm Sunday and set it up among their vines or crops, asserting that although the crops all around should be destroyed by hail, yet they will remain unharmed in their own fields. Such matters should be decided upon according to the distinction of which we have already treated. Okay.
Yeah, I ain't looking that up. Because I'm guaranteeing it hasn't been done.
Well, maybe. I don't know.
Similarly, there are women who, for the preservation of milk and that cows should not be deprived of their milk by witchcraft, give freely to the poor in God's name the whole of a Sunday's yield of milk, and say that by this sort of alms the cows yield even more milk and are preserved from witchcraft. This need not be regarded as superstitious, provided that it is done out of pity for the poor, and that they implore the divine mercy for the protection of their cattle, leaving the effect to the good pleasure of divine providence.
So is this some of that prosperity gospel shit?
They're giving it to the poor, though, not to the church. So no.
Okay, fine. Again, Nider, in the first chapter of his Preceptorium, says that it is lawful to bless cattle in the same way as sick men, by means of written charms and sacred words, even if they have the appearance of incantations, as long as the 7 conditions we have mentioned are observed. For he says that devout persons and virgins have been known to sign a cow with the sign of the cross, together with the Lord's Prayer and the angelic salutation, upon which the devil's work has been driven off if it is due to witchcraft. So it's an incantation, but it's not if it follows the rules for... whatever. Sounds like bullshit to me.
I just want to point out that St. Francis of Assisi had been dead for about 300 years when this thing was first written.
Lovely, okay.
You know, he's the patron saint of animals. And in his Formicarius, he tells that witches confess that their witchcraft is obstructed by the reverent observation of the ceremonies of the church, by the aspersion of holy water, or the consumption of consecrated salt, by the lawful use of candles on the day of purification, and of blessed palms. I guess that means they got a little money pressed into them, if you know what I mean. Nudge, nudge, wink, wink.
Say no more.
And such things. For this reason, the church uses these in her exorcisms, that they may lessen the power of the devil.
Okay. Also, because when witches wish to deprive a cow of milk, they are in the habit of begging a little of the milk or butter which comes from that cow, so that they may afterwards, by their act, bewitch the cow. Therefore, women should take care, when they are asked by persons suspected of this crime, not to give away the least thing to them. Okay.
Okay. Hang on. I got to mute myself for a second because I got to check on something with this PC, and if I don't do it now, it'll get lost.
Okay.
So,
You appear to still be muted.
yeah, I attempted to unmute myself, and it maximized the thing for some fucking reason.
Because you have to trick it into doing what you want.
I know. There we go.
Wait, you said PC. I was thinking Mac for a second there. Never mind.
Well, yeah, I was using PC as generic.
Then I was right.
Yeah. Because if I was doing this on my PC, we could record it, but that's neither here nor there because that thing's fucked up. Cows. Hang on. Okay. I had to check to see if I could get the Homer Simpson clip where as a little kid he runs around scaring the cows at the family farm and they all dry up and stop giving milk and then the farm goes bankrupt. You think that'll be a good drop for the episode?
I don't think I've seen that one, but...
Well, it was back when they were still relevant.
Oh, okay.
Farm went bust after the cows started giving sour milk. Something must have spooked them good. Stupid cows.
In fact, if I'm not mistaken, that had Meryl Streep in the episode playing Homer's mom.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, that's how powerful they were. They could get an Oscar-winning actress. Yeah.
Back in the day.
Oh, good. Again, there are women who, when they have been turning a church for a long while to no purpose, and if they suspect that this is due to some witch, procure, if possible, a little butter from the house of that witch. Then they make that butter into 3 pieces and throw them into the churn, invoking the Holy Trinity, the Father, the Son, and the Holy Ghost. And so all witchcraft is put to flight. Here again, it is a case of opposing vanity to vanity, for the simple reason that the butter must be borrowed from the suspected witch. But if it were done without this, if with the invocation of the Holy Trinity and the Lord's Prayer, the woman were to commit the effect of the divine will, she would remain beyond reproach. Nevertheless, drink. It is not commendable practice. It is not a commendable practice to throw in the 3 pieces of butter, for it would be better to banish the witchcraft by means of sprinkling holy water or putting in some exorcised salt, always with the prayers we have mentioned.
Oh.
I want to point out something, and I did not know this. In ancient times, the feet didn't walk upon England's mountains green, but it's a song, Jerusalem. There's a Monty Python sketch about dog kennels and a guy getting into a fish tank and they have to sing Jerusalem. And the only lines that they sing from it are, "And did those feet in ancient times walk upon England's mountains green?" Because they thought there was this weird subsect of British Christianity that thought somehow the UK was actually the Holy Land and that Jesus lived there and not in the Mideast?
What do I know?
I don't know.
They
But
s-
anyways,
They do seem to be a little out of step with everybody else, so whatever. Okay.
yeah, in the past, when they made butter and salted it, they would put in so much salt that it is inedible. And you would
Yep.
have to soak the butter in water
To
to get
leach
the
the
salt
salt
out.
out? Holy fuck.
Mhm.
Yeah, they do
Even though
tend to overcomplicate things, yes.
that if you keep butter at the right temperature, it'll last practically forever
Mm-hmm.
or under the right conditions. Because the big giant balls of butter they fished out of bogs in Scotland and Ireland,
Mm-hmm.
that have been there for like 1,000 years, they're still edible. Apparently, they taste really funky,
Well,
so
I
you want them, but
wouldn't be surprised by that, but yep, okay, sure.
I mean, if you like your whiskey peaty, maybe you like your butter peaty.
Oh.
I like a peaty whiskey, but I don't think I want my butter peaty.
What you don't want to do is get so drunk you're hungover for 3 days on a peaty, like an Islay malt. Because that's all you can taste for a couple of days. And it's like,
I
yeah,
bet.
yeah, no, thanks.
One of the tech podcasts I listen to, the last part of each episode is one of the guys talking about whiskeys.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, dude goes into details like how it's made and things like that. And he's actually toured like various distilleries. So
Yep.
he always has a recommendation for, this or that whiskey. And the guy is one of these people who he can afford to buy anything that's available.
Yep.
But he says there's no point in buying a $2,000 bottle of whiskey. He says, because either it'll be the greatest thing you've ever had and you'll never want to drink anything else,
Mm-hmm.
or it'll taste like everything else and you'll have wasted $2,000.
Yep.
And he says, even if you can afford $2,000, there's no point.
Yep, that's why Hitch drank Johnny Walker Black.
I've never had black. I've had red. The red was not that good.
It's all right. It's not terribly expensive. It's not cheap rot gut.
No.
But, it's a decent whiskey. So, whatever.
Yeah. And I'm just hoping that you guys' boycott of bourbon will make the prices here drop.
Well, my brother is bemoaning the dropping of American bourbon because, like, what the fuck do we have that I can drink? He likes his whiskey, but Canadian whiskey is generally rye whiskey. I prefer a sour mash or a barley malt.
Yeah.
Rye whiskey does not agree with me. So.
Oh, and something else I found out from listening to that tech podcast, you guys ferment your whiskey differently than everybody else.
I wouldn't be surprised.
And I forget what the process is, or what the difference is in the process. Like, I think it might be you guys ferment it in stainless steel, and then you put it in barrels, whereas everybody else, once they distill it, they dump it into a barrel. I forget the difference, but you guys do something different where everybody else puts it in a barrel, or, everybody else does one step of the process in one vessel. You guys do that process in a different vessel than anybody else, and then you move it to a standard vessel. And I don't remember what it was now. and it will
Okay.
take me far too long to track it down. But that I'm like, well, that explains why Canadian whiskey I've had that doesn't taste the same as similar whiskeys from other places.
Yeah, no,
Um,
wouldn't be surprised.
yeah, I mean, Crown Royal's okay, but yeah, it's not. I have other preferences I'd take before it, but of course I've had stuff that's produced here in the States that's even worse. But the worst whiskey I've ever had was Canadian Mist.
Don't believe I've had the pleasure.
I was in a liquor store one time, and it was like they had a liter bottle, and it was really cheap.
Yeah.
And I was like, well, how bad could this be? I can always mix it with something.
That was your first mistake.
Dude, you have no idea how long it took me to go through that bottle. Hey, even when it was like, the mixer was like 1/8 whiskey, I can still taste that shit. We're talking, it's mixed with like Coke or, something heavy and syrupy, and I suppose just had this weird papery aftertaste to it.
Yeah, okay.
I never bought that shit again, I'll tell you that much.
Crown Royal, and what's the CC?
Canadian Club.
Yeah, no, that's not something that it would not entice me to come back to drinking. No,
I haven't had Canadian Club, I don't think.
You're not missing anything.
Mm. There was when at ReasonCon, they had on the last night they just had the last event on the last day was a social event where we'd all hang out, and they had a bartender, and they had some kind of rot gut scotch.
Cutty Sark or something?
Oh no.
Oh, not that good.
This was some weird off-brand that I have seen, but I've never heard of until that moment. And it was like, I'm drinking this because none of the other stuff they have is anything that, like, I'm not a fan of martinis.
Right.
It's like it's the only scotch they've got, the only whiskey. Nah.
Grim. All right.
Yeah. Again, since often the whole of a person's cattle are destroyed by witchcraft, those who have suffered in this way ought to take care to remove the soil under the threshold of the stable or stall, and where the cattle go to water, and replace it with fresh soil sprinkled with holy water. For witches have often confessed that they have placed some instrument of witchcraft at the instance of devils. Not insistence, but instance of devils. They have only had to make a hole, glory hole, in which the devil has placed the instrument of witchcraft.
That's mine. Never mind.
And that this was a visible object, such as a stone, or a piece of wood, or a mouse, or some serpent. Okay. Obvious jokes aside about wood and serpents and glory holes. I just want to point out that if you dig up soil in a random part, you're probably going to find a stone, a hunk of wood, and possibly a mouse or a snake.
Yep. It's all about the ritual.
Yeah. For it is agreed that the devil can perform such things by himself without the need of any partner, But mind you, of course, he has to have God's permission.
Mm-hmm.
But usually, for the perdition of her soul, he compels a witch to cooperate with him.
Yeah. Because that's how he rolls. Fresh soil. Good one.
That's it for this episode of the Atheist in the Trailer Park podcast. You can subscribe to the show on iTunes. It's also on Stitcher, and most of the episodes are on YouTube. Follow the show on Twitter at tparkatheist, and it's on Facebook at facebook.com/trailerparkatheist. You can email me at trailerparkatheist@gmail.com. Show notes can be found at tparkatheist.blogspot.com. If you happen to like the podcast, please rate it on iTunes. If you'd like to donate to support the podcast, there's a donate button on the show notes page. You can also support the show on Patreon at patreon.com/TNTucker.
Say goodnight, Fuzz-Nuts.
All I know is this violates every canon of respectable broadcasting.
Damned cat.